Hello and welcome to ROG Pulse, your inside look at what's happening behind the scenes here at the Republic of Gamers. Today is the day you've all been waiting for, as AFMF2 is now available on the ROG Ally and the Ally X.
Yes, it is. If you have an Ally or an Ally X, head to Armory Crate's Update Center to grab the latest AMD graphics drivers right now and get this new and improved version of AMD's Fluid Motion Frames on your handheld. I know you guys have been waiting. It's very important to us to give updates some time in the oven, so it's been thoroughly tested, ready to release. It is rolling out kind of slowly. Like, these tend to have a staged rollout. So it went up on
Multi-day.
our site a couple days ago. It went up in like my Asus shortly after that. It should be out in Armory Crate now or very, very soon. So
Cool.
keep an eye on Armory Crate. In fact, we'll show you where to find that right now. Jake, let's show them where to find it, just in case you
Okay.
guys don't already have it. Here is
Yeah.
you open up Armory Crate, and if you go over to the settings tab, there is an option called Update Center. You can head straight there, check for updates, and you should see a new GPU driver appear. One thing I'll mention: after you grab that update, make sure that the AMD software is running in your system tray. If it's not, you may have to launch the AMD software once before the features work in like Command Center and stuff. So yeah, you can just open up the Start menu and search for AMD software if it's not already running. I've seen some people be like, "Hey, RSR and AFMF aren't working when I enable them in the Command Center." Sometimes that's because the AMD software is not running in the background. Sometimes it requires a manual launch. Usually, it should auto start itself with your computer, but sometimes if you have a new Ally or after certain updates, you may need to manually launch it again. So, in your opinion, can I run The Witcher 3 with AFMF? Yeah, that's a great game for it. So let's talk about what AFMF is and when you might want to use it in certain games. Jake is going to show some footage we recorded a couple days ago because we want to kind of show the before and after a little bit more seamlessly than live capture allows us to. So we're going to do that. But for those of you that aren't familiar with AMD Fluid Motion Frames, also known as AFMF, you can check out our previous episode about the technology. But here's the short version. AFMF is part of a new suite of technologies called frame generation. Frame generation takes the existing frames of your game and it intelligently generates extra frames in between them to give you smoother motion. Now, AMD offers two different types of frame generation. The first is called FSR. FSR version 3 introduced frame generation into a number of different games, and you'll find it in the settings of the game that you're playing. So if the game you're playing supports FSR for frame generation, some examples: Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales support it, God of War Ragnarok supports it, Call of Duty supports it. You'll find those in those games settings. And you'll want to use FSR 3 instead of AFMF if it's available to you, because it provides a slightly better experience, been built into the game and all that. But not all games support FSR 3 frame generation. So Hogwarts Legacy, which Jake is showing here, does not have FSR 3 frame gen built in. In those cases, AFMF is a setting in the AMD software, like in the driver, or you can access it from the Ally's Command Center. And because it's in the driver, you can use it in virtually any game, even those that don't have FSR frame generation built in. Now, there are some caveats here. AMD has disabled AFMF in some games that they know don't work perfectly with the technology. So I think like Forza Horizon 5, even if you have AFMF turned on, it won't enable itself in Forza Horizon 5. It's kind of like blacklisted in the AMD driver. You can override that in AMD software if you want, but like they've turned it off in a few games for certain reasons, because the way that movement works in certain games, like it just lends itself better to AFMF or worse to AFMF. In addition, there are a few settings that you'll want to tweak before you enable AFMF. In particular, you want your in-game settings. So in Hogwarts Legacy, for example, you would open up the settings menu and you'd want to set Hogwarts Legacy to full screen or borderless full screen, and you would want to turn VSync off. So to answer Floppy's question here, or sorry, who was it that asked about The Witcher 3? Jacopo. Witcher 3 is a great example because it does not have FSR 3 built in. But especially with the next gen update, it's can be pretty graphically intense. So it is a great candidate for AFMF2. And in fact, I think that's the game we used in our first demo of AFMF.
It is.
And Hogwarts Legacy, another great example. I'm playing Shadow of Mordor right now, replaying that. It's one of my favorite games. And because it's a little bit older, it doesn't have things like FSR built in. But actually, still, even today, if you turn up all the settings, it can still be decently intensive. So I'm using AFMF with that as well, and it's working great. But when I was playing Spider-Man Miles Morales before that, I did not use AFMF because it has FSR3 frame generation built in, and that worked beautifully right from the game settings. So the other thing that you want to pay attention to with AFMF, ideally, you want your game to be reaching at least 45 to 50 frames per second or more without AFMF for the best experience.
Which is
the more
what we were getting in
frames-
that other clip, right around there.
Yes, that's what we were getting in Hogwarts Legacy. And if you're not getting that, try to turn down some of the graphic settings. So, turn down shadows, turn down lighting until you're hitting that 45 to 50 or more frames per second. Because the more frames that AFMF starts with, the better the result is, right? So if your game is only running at like 20 frames per second, even with a bunch of frames interpolated into that, the end result isn't going to be as great because it doesn't have like as much data to work with. So set your game's graphics settings in a way that gets you at least 45 frames per second, and you'll be in good shape. We've had I saw a question in chat that was saying, does AFMF2 work any better if you're running below a certain frame rate? AFMF2 does have a number of improvements, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. It doesn't really change this recommendation. You still want your game to be getting at least like 45 to 50 frames per second. 60 if you can is great. It's not, it's not going to make an unplayable game playable. It's more taking a game that is running pretty well and just makes it super smooth is kind of the ideal. Lamar asks, which technology is better, FSR3 or AFMF2? FSR3 frame generation is the better technology because it's built into the game engine and it has more data to work with. It has like motion vectors and things like that. Like it knows what direction your character is moving in, whereas AFMF is just taking the information that it sees on screen and kind of working with it. So both great technologies, and it's nice that we have AFMF to use in games that don't support FSR. But if your game supports FSR, you're going to want to use that. Now, again, talking of frame rates, we do have a bunch of recommended settings for games on the ROG Ally, which target that 45 to 60 frames per second window. So you can check the link in the video description to get some of those. Those are a great place to start. So from there, you can turn on AFMF in Armory Crate. Actually, let's show that real quick before here's a peek of the demo. Jake's getting almost 90 frames per second. Let's show how to turn it off real quick. Turn it on. In the performance menu here, you can go down to GPU settings and turn the AMD Fluid Motion Frames switch on. You can also do it. You can also add it to the command center. So by default, it's not in the command center. But if you go over to this window, you can click the add button, add a tile for AFMF. And then when you're in a game or before you launch a game, you can pop out the command center and just flip AFMF on right there. And we have actually ways to automate this that we'll go through a little bit later. But when you enable it, you're going to get a much nicer frame rate. So in Hogwarts Legacy, when we were seeing 40s and 50s before, after turning on AFMF, we're getting 80s, close to 90 frames per second.
In some situations, it was 90, yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically there's a little bit of GPU overhead, but it's essentially doubling your frames after accounting for that GPU overhead from the original, because it's inserting a frame in between every frame. That's really cool, and it makes the whole game feel smoother. So all of that is true of AFMF 1 as well. So what's new in AFMF 2? Well, a couple things. So AFMF 2 offers lower latency, first and foremost, than the original version of AFMF. Since the graphics driver has to know what frame is coming next before it generates that in-between frame, frame generation does inherently introduce some latency to the pipeline. But AMD has optimized the feature with AFMF2 to lower latency significantly. I think in their testing, they saw like 28% lower latency in Cyberpunk 2077. In Counter-Strike 2, it was like 12% lower latency. So it depends on the game, but that's great. So that's an advantage of AFMF2. By the way, AMD also recommends turning on AMD anti-lag alongside AFMF2 to get the lowest latency possible, which, yeah, that's basically what I do as well. The other advantage of AFMF2 is that it now supports borderless full screen. So previously you had to use exclusive full screen for AFMF. Now you can choose one or the other, which is good for games that don't provide both options, or if you like borderless because you're alt tabbing out a lot or whatever. In addition, there are a few new settings in the AMD software that let you tweak how AFMF works and add some kind of flexibility to it. So we can show these right now in the AMD software, but I'll tell you by default, these are already set to the ideal settings for the ROG Ally. So you shouldn't need to tweak these. But I know some of you like to play with these things or know what improvements have been made. So I want to kind of show it off, but you shouldn't have to change any of this. So just keep that in mind. If you open up the AMD software and you go to the gaming tab and then the graphics sub tab, you might have, you're in the settings for a specific game. You may have to back out of that.
Why did I end up there?
I'm not sure.
Oh, there's the graphics.
There we go. There you go. So then I go to the graphics tab. So these are your global graphics settings. If you scroll down under AMD Fluid Motion Frames 2, you'll see two new dropdowns. One is called Performance Mode. This is a new mode that should provide better performance on integrated graphics chips like the Z1 Extreme and the ROG Ally because it reduces the overhead needed for frame generation. Quality mode is more meant for desktop systems. So you can try that, but really performance is going to give you the best experience on the Ally, and auto will detect that you're using a Z1 Extreme and set that properly. Again, you don't need to change these settings. Search mode is a new thing that optimizes how fallback works. So some of you may have found when using AFMF that if you make a really quick movement with the camera, it will disable AFMF for a brief moment while it does that to try and avoid artifacts in the game, like graphical artifacts from showing up from too quick of a turn. Search mode uses AI optimizations to improve the algorithm that governs this functionality, but it's dependent on resolution. So for search mode, standard mode is for 1080p and below, and high is for 1440p and above. Since the Ally has a 1080p screen, standard is the correct setting, and the auto will correctly use standard on the ROG Ally. So again, you don't need to tweak these, but I wanted to, because those are two improvements that have been made to AFMF2 that I thought some people might be interested in. So if you leave those at the auto setting, those will already be implemented and you'll get those improvements to the AFMF experience with AFMF2.
Beautiful.
One more thing I want to mention, and then I'm going to check chat for some questions. If you go into Armory Crate and you go into your game library, one of the really cool things that our team built in, every game has a game profile. Oh, it's because you launched Master Chief Collection. Maybe that's why AMD was.
It is.
Might have launched it by accident.
It's running in the background right now. Yep.
Jake's been playing video games this whole time. Okay, so if you highlight a game, you press X and you can choose this option called Set Game Profile. This lets you set a bunch of different settings just for that specific game. So if you go down to GPU settings, you could set it to run, or in configuration, you could set a certain game to run in turbo mode and another game to run in silent mode. You can also do this with AFMF. So if we want Hogwarts Legacy to always launch with AFMF on, you can change this AFMF dropdown to on. That way you can leave AFMF turned off in the command center and set it on just in the game profile of the games you want to use it for. And that way you don't have to constantly be toggling it on and off. Whenever you launch, this is the play. Yeah. 100%. Because I find that most of the games that I've been playing lately have FSR3 frame generation built in already. And so I'll use that for most of those games and then use this to just turn on AFMF in the games where I need it. And that way I never have to toggle anything. It's completely automated and I just get a super smooth experience in every game.
Yeah.
It's really, really nice that this is built into Armory Crate because then you kind of can set it and forget it. So, all right.
Meanwhile, Master Chief Collection.
Yeah, Jake can go ahead and quit that now while I look at some questions. Okay, so I see a question. Someone saying that they've already downloaded it and they were having stuttering with AFMF2 while the AMD overlay is on. So yes, I actually noticed that too. There may be a bug there with the AMD overlay. I'm not sure. My advice: use either our overlay or AMD or whatever your overlay of choice is to find the right settings to get your game running at that 45 plus frames per second without AFMF turned on. Once you've dialed in those settings, I would turn your overlay off and then turn AFMF on, and just use AFMF without any overlays because sometimes it's still a little we and AMD are optimizing how AFMF works with those FPS counters, but it's not like quite perfect yet. So what's giving me the smoothest experience right now in my gameplay is turning all overlays off when I use AFMF. That's what I would recommend at this point in time for that, if that's what you're experiencing. I've had no stutters when I turn off all overlays. Is AFMF2 activate when using the side customizable menu on the Ally? Yes. As we showed earlier, you can turn it on in the command center, and that is a great way to use it if you're not doing it on a game-by-game basis.
Just got to make sure you add that tile into your command center.
Yeah. Yes, because it's not there by default.
Right.
All right, let's see. I've been playing a lot of games on the Ally X, 55 frames per second. That small screen, it looks perfect. Yes, that is because of variable refresh rate. The Ally and the Ally X use a FreeSync premium screen, and that makes a huge difference to smoothness, even without AFMF, but with AFMF as well.
The panel, yeah.
Yeah, the panel, that's something that some people don't realize about our panel. Not all handhelds have this. With a lot of handhelds, if it's just like a 60 hertz panel, if you dip below 60 frames per second, you'll start to see some stuttering. That doesn't happen on the Ally because we have a VRR panel. That's a huge, huge benefit to the screen that we used on this. With games that don't have an AFMF option, can we leave it on, or do we have to toggle it every time from the submenu? I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. I assume you mean games that don't have FSR3. You can. Oh, I see what you're saying. So I would not leave AFMF on all the time necessarily, because here's the thing. I also saw a question about this saying, can we use both FSR3 and AFMF2 at the same time? I would not recommend that. No. Yeah. That's going to be, you're going to have 2 generated frames for every 1 normal frame, and you're going to be more likely to get graphical artifacts. AMD doesn't recommend using those 2 technologies together either. So no, I would not recommend that. I think you would want to toggle AFMF on manually for games that you want to use it, or you would want to use the game profile like we showed to have it automatically turn on.
I can't encourage people
I would not
to do
just
that
leave
enough.
it on all the time.
Find the games that you want to use AFMF2 for. Like, you're going to get FSR3 on a lot of games already built in. But those other games like Hogwarts and Witcher, and I mean, those are the 2 main ones that are coming to mind. I don't know what other games are going to be great for it. There will be plenty of games.
I'm using it in Shadow of Mordor. Okay. I used it in Spider-Man before Spider-Man got FSR3.
Right. We're seeing more and more games get those updates though with FSR3, right? So
yeah, which is cool. And like, you know, it's nice to have that because that is technically the better option. FSR3 frame generation is the one you want to use if your game supports it. But if it doesn't, then you can turn AFMF on. But just leaving AFMF on all the time is not the ideal solution, right? Because then it's going to double up with FSR3 frame generation or whatever. So yeah. I definitely recommend toggling it on and off manually from the command center, or using the game profile to have it turn on in the games you want it.
But the reason AMD has made this great tool is because they can't necessarily enable FSR3 for every single game, because that's a lot of manual.
Well, it's on the developers.
Yeah, it's a lot of manual effort.
It's game developers have to integrate it into the game, and not all game developers have the resources to do that. And some games are just old enough that like they're not still being worked on, right? I'm playing Shadow of Mordor. That game's 10 years old. That's not gonna get an FSR3 frame generation update because
that's a good point.
You know, the developers are done with it, but it still benefits from it. And I love that AMD has given us this second option in the driver.
Oh, it's huge.
To use with a wider variety of games. AMD is pretty cool about giving us some of those extra options at the driver level, which is really, really handy. So yeah, cool. Yes, and check out the link in the description of this video. We have an article that gives you all of this information about how to make the most of AFMF. I can drop it in chat right now. You can read that and get a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, as well as some of the settings and stuff that I recommend. And you guys will have a great, super smooth experience with your Ally. Otherwise, that is it for us today. Guys, as you know, this is just part of our show. During our full stream, we talk about what's on shelf that week. We talk about what products are on sale. Right now, there are a lot of products on sale. We jam about games, other stuff like that. So if you want to see that, you can tune in live on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, to see the full show. Plus, Jake streams games on our YouTube and Twitch channels every Tuesday and Friday. And you can follow us on our social media channels and join our Discord. rog.gg/join Discord
You
to
did it.
join our Discord. That's a great way to stay up to date with the latest news and announcements and things like that. By the way, follow us, subscribe, because CES is coming up and we are going to have a bunch of other stuff to show off real soon.